Hi, and welcome to another presentation from your business tutor, learning your way, anytime, anywhere. As we saw in the first part of this series of presentations, stakeholders have different and varied interests in a business. What's more, each one of those stakeholders wants to achieve what it is interested in. For example, employees will want higher wages, whereas customers will want quality products from a business. However, to what extent each of these stakeholders will get what they want is very much determined by how much influence and impact each stakeholder can have on a business. This is why this presentation on stakeholder influence and impact is so important. So what are we going to learn in today's presentation? Well, first of all, we're going to find out how stakeholders influence an organisation. And once we've done that, we're then going to explore and identify how those stakeholders impact on organisations. Before we turn to our first question, let's quickly remember that a stakeholder is an individual, group, or organisation that has an interest in the success of an organisation. However, for a stakeholder to achieve their interest, they must be able to influence and impact a business. So with that in mind, let's turn to our first question. What is stakeholder influence? Stakeholder influence describes the measures a stakeholder can use to persuade a business to achieve what they are interested in getting from the business. For example, employees could threaten strike action if a business does not give them a pay rise. However, to understand stakeholder influence more fully, we also have to realise that different stakeholders can be more influential than others. This is why it is important to find out what stakeholder impact is. Stakeholder impact refers to how powerful or effective a stakeholder's influence is. For example, some stakeholders can cause massive disruption to a business, whereas others may only cause very limited disruption and therefore aren't very influential. However, what we also have to remember is that the amount of impact a stakeholder has is not fixed. In certain circumstances, some stakeholders will have more impact than others, whereas in different situations, it could be the exact opposite. So now that we've identified what stakeholder influence and impact is, let's now turn and look at how specific stakeholders try to influence and impact businesses. Let's start by looking at internal stakeholders, and first of all, owners, such as a sole trader or a partner. Both these types of owner are very influential because they own the business and are involved in all decision making. In fact, it is through their decision making that they can influence and impact a business. For example, a business owner could influence their business by deciding to run an advertising campaign. This could impact the business in two ways. First, the business would see an increase in costs as they have to pay for the advertising campaign. But also, it would see a big increase in sales, which hopefully will result in profits rising overall. However, from a company's perspective, their owners, shareholders, can also influence and impact a business. For example, shareholders vote at annual general meetings, abbreviated to AGM. These meetings vote on important matters affecting the business. This means shareholders can express their opinion on the company's actions by either voting with or against the resolutions discussed at the meeting. For example, shareholders vote on resolutions concerning the appointment of directors, the level of dividend paid, and on any major decisions made by directors over the last year. This can impact the business because if enough shareholders vote against the board of directors' resolutions, This would create a huge loss of confidence in the company. As such, you would expect the share price to fall significantly, which affects the value of the business. This, of course, could lead to another way in which shareholders could influence a business, and that is by selling their shares. This would cause the share price to fall and the value of the business to decrease, which may then open the business up to a takeover from another organisation. Let's now turn our attention to our second internal stakeholder and look at employees. Employees can influence a business in a number of different ways, but probably the most influential way is by threatening industrial action, such as going on strike. The impact of this can be huge, as the business may have to shut, meaning production would stop and nothing would be sold. This, of course, could be worse still if customers decide to switch to another business. On the other hand, employees can influence in a far less disruptive way. For example, by making suggestions at meetings. This could result in the business changing its production techniques so that less waste is created. This would therefore reduce costs and make the business's production methods more ethical. Final internal stakeholders, directors and managers, can also be very influential. This is because they make decisions which can influence the direction of the business. For example, the directors could decide to open a new branch. This could impact a business because initially it might be quite expensive to set up and advertise the new shop. But eventually sales should start to rise and the business will become more profitable. Of course, managers could also influence by making a decision to find a new supplier. This could impact the business as it may result in better quality raw materials being delivered or costs being reduced because the supplier doesn't charge as much. External stakeholders such as customers can also have an influence upon businesses. For example, customers could complain about the level of service they have received. This can have a huge impact, especially if they tell other people, as this can create negative word of mouth. Of course, customers can be even more influential by taking their business elsewhere. This would impact the business as sales would fall and profits would decrease. Suppliers, on the other hand, can influence a business by not delivering inventory on time. This can impact a business, as without stock, a business may have nothing to put on its shelves to sell to customers, or it may have to halt production until inventory arrives. Suppliers can also influence by charging more for their inventory. This impacts a business because their costs will increase, which could decrease their profits unless they pass on the cost increase to customers in higher prices. The government can also be influential. This is because they set laws which businesses must comply with. For example, the government could introduce stricter pollution laws. This would impact the business, as it may have to change its production methods so it doesn't pollute as much, which we know would cost money. Of course, if a business did not change its ways, then the government could fine them for breaking the law. On a more positive note, the government can also influence a business by offering grants to set up in areas of high unemployment. The impact of this is that the costs of growing the business are reduced, as grants don't need to be repaid. Another external stakeholder that can influence a business is the local community, as they can support the business by being customers or employees of that business, which helps the business run successfully day to day. However, the local community and pressure groups can influence a business negatively as well. For example, if they feel the business is acting unethically by causing pollution, they may protest outside the business. This would create bad press for the business and may result in local politicians and newspapers getting involved, which could put even more pressure on the business to change its ways. A final external stakeholder that could influence a business is their bank. they can influence by deciding whether or not to lend money to the business. The impact of this could be crucial, as granting the loan may allow the business to finance a takeover of a competitor, whereas not providing finance could cause the business to run out of cash and become illiquid. Similarly, the interest rate at which the bank lends money can also have an impact. If the rate is low, the cost of borrowing is cheap, which may encourage a business to borrow money to grow their business, which of course could help create jobs. So what did we learn today? Well, first of all, we found out how stakeholders influence an organisation. And after that, we identified what impact stakeholders can have on an organisation. As you've probably worked out for yourself, stakeholders can have a big influence on business. However, the level of influence each stakeholder has is very much determined by what impact they can have on the business. For example, if a stakeholder can have a big impact on a business, it is far more likely to get what it is interested in than a stakeholder that has very little power. This is an important point, as when a business makes a decision, it should carefully consider which stakeholders can affect the success of that decision. By doing that, the business will have a much better chance of implementing the decision effectively. Because if they develop a strategy which takes into account the interests of powerful stakeholders, the business will gain their backing. As a result, powerful stakeholders will support the decision being made. This means it will have a far better chance of being successfully implemented.